Hello, and welcome to On the Road to DevHops. I'm Trace Bannon. I'm here with my sparring partner, Bryan Finster. Bryan, say hello.
Hi.
Hey. So normally we kind of jump right into a topic, but today I want to take a step back and start with our drinks. And then we'll go on to what we're really going to spar about today. Now, unlike usual, where it's just you and I, you brought somebody with you today who may be ganging up on us. So Tom, say
Hi,
hello.
hi everyone. I have a Zevia drink, which is it's a soda, non-alcoholic. It's has stevia as opposed to sugar or high fructose corn syrup. So I'm going to open it. Hopefully, it won't explode on my keyboard.
Listen for the open. Oh, there we go.
Yeah,
It
there
did
we go.
sound like a beer, so that's close enough. And Mr. Fencer, what are you drinking this evening, sir?
I'm drinking a Deschutes IPA. That's pretty good. Citrusy.
Oh, citrusy. Well, about I think 2 episodes ago, you were drinking a red, and that had me thinking about red wine. So I decided to go with I'm in kind of a macaroni and cheese, not going to spend too much kind of mood, and went with the Apothic Red. But again, I did put it in the correct glass,
You
so I
know,
feel sophisticated.
Apothic is not bad.
No, it is not. It's one of my go-tos, like peanut butter, some store brand extra sharp cheddar, and Apothic Red. So so Bryan Finster, you and I have been doing this software engineering thing for a long time, this development thing,
Yeah.
helping people figure out how to improve delivering value. And I'm running up against a whole lot of obstacles with people. They want to measure stuff. And I kind of get it. We need to measure some things.
I mean,
But
like
they,
lines of code.
oh, like lines of code, S-lock. That's right. They want to measure. I actually had a conversation 2 weeks ago about exactly that. But they don't know what they want to measure, but they know they need to measure it. And so they start looking back at reports that they were doing on something waterfall, something with some PMO attached to it. EVM, yes, I hear EVM words, they make me cringe. How do we help these different project teams? First of all, why should we be measuring? Why should we be worried about all these metrics things? Are people off their rocker with this? Tom, what do you think about this whole idea of measuring and metrics?
Well, this is a loaded question.
Mhm.
And you want to measure in order to get better and to improve. However, many things that are measured don't really matter that much. And if you go back to the Agile Manifesto, one of the signers of the Agile Manifesto was named Martin Fowler. And he had a post many years ago, and maybe he's changed his view since then, but he said you really can't measure productivity metrics, right? You can't measure developer productivity, right? Everyone knows who the good developers are. Everyone knows who the developers who are struggling, but you can't measure story points accurately. You can't measure velocity. You can't measure by lines of code. You can, there are a few things you may be able to look at, but overall, you just can't measure it the same way as measuring the number of chickens that flowed down through a meat processing plant and how many chicken wings you got off, right? It's not quite the same thing. And much of what we do in software is not the same every day. Unlike
Exactly.
maybe a factory where it creates widgets and there's a consistent pattern that can be followed.
I find that a lot of times when people truly press the issue, I want to understand defects by developer. I want to understand features that or user stories or story points by developer. That always is the makings for angst. It's always the makings for tearing apart a team, because
Yeah.
it's just like a
If you
soccer
want
team, right?
to,
There's always somebody who's a faster runner. That's fine. There's
if you
always
want
somebody who's a stronger kicker. Go ahead,
if you
Bryan.
want to, the fastest way to destroy a team is to measure the people on the team.
Yeah.
And I've witnessed it multiple times. I worked with a team, and the team was too big in the first place. There was 19 people on one team, but it was actually a team of it was actually 19 teams of one, because the manager in that area was measuring people by how many tasks they completed in Jira.
That
And
means that
so,
you game Jira, doesn't it? Isn't that when you're starting to
well,
plan things out? You're like,
it
how
also
small
means
can
that
I
if you
decompose this?
it also means you have staff software engineers being measured exactly the same as entry level developers by how many tasks they complete. So instead of helping entry level developers become staff software engineers, they're working on individual tasks,
I mean,
right?
it's the sports analogy gets a little crazy with this, doesn't it? When you try to figure out what sport would you like in software too, right? Because you do in baseball, you do keep some stats, but it's very individualized,
Yeah, well,
right?
baseball is, and I wrote a rant on LinkedIn about this recently where I compared some sports, and baseball is a very ritualized
Mhm.
game,
Yeah.
right? The same thing happens again and again. And to me, the closest sport I can compare it to is basketball because you got a small team of five. You have positions on the team, but it's pretty fluid, right? People are just kind of responding to what's going on, and that's from a sports perspective. That's the closest sport I can think of.
I normally fall back to soccer. My husband's a soccer coach, one of his many side hustles, and having been the parent of keepers, of goalkeepers, it gives you an interesting perspective. Everybody does have different strengths on a soccer team. And yes, it's a little bit large when we're comparing numbers, right? 11. But if I think about the ability, the keeper has to be able to do everything that the field players can, maybe not as fast. But there are times where they come out of the net and they're playing with the team, but they have their special role though is being able to call things out and having a different vantage point. Same thing, I got a striker that may need to drop back into goal because something happened. So there's really that changing of position, right? That happens real time, similar to basketball. What do you think,
Yeah,
Tom?
yeah.
Hmm. As far as a sport, I don't know. I don't want to say professional wrestling, but that's sometimes how I feel like it is, right? Because I agree that you don't want to measure lines of code to understand developer productivity. I think many agree with that. Sometimes lines of code, though, does give you an idea of how big a project is. If there's 8 million lines of code or 20,000, that could give you some sort of relative
Oh yeah,
understanding
and
of
I,
refactoring. Yeah.
yeah, I want to talk about that in a minute too because
Mhm.
I've got yeah. But go
Yeah.
ahead, please. Yeah.
But one thing that it's kind of come up recently is I would like to measure the number of check-ins, and some people disagree with that, and they disagree with it because they don't want people to feel as though they are being measured by the number of check-ins, nor they could game the system
Mhm.
potentially. But when you look at many companies that are struggling to move towards a continuous integration, right? To me, there's only two words: continuous and integration. And when someone's like, we have our branches that last once a month, and at the end of the sprint, we merge them in, right? That's not
Uh,
continuous integration.
true, true, true. But I would
Well,
also, but it's, you're going to run into a little bit of a mess at first with this because you are going to have, look, I haven't written my test yet. We're supposed to be doing TDD, but nobody's really looking. They're looking at how many times I check in. So I'm going to add this comment and I'm going to check in and I'm going to make a very
Mhm,
small change and I'm going to check in. So,
mhm.
and I'm the person who normally hits save
Yeah,
like every couple of lines as I'm writing,
yeah,
unless I can see
sure.
that auto save is on.
Mhm.
How do you keep folks, how do you help project teams to learn to not game that and get comfortable with
Mhm.
check-ins as a measure?
Well, because you also have a code review. So I'm talking checking into your master branch, right? You might be working in a feature branch for a couple hours or
Okay,
maybe a day, but you would be checking into master. And part of that
copy.
is a branch policy that requires approval by another team member. And so we're also looking at not only number of check-ins, but the comments that people are putting in, because someone, a lot of times people just game the check-in and they don't even look at it, right? And there's obvious issues such as passwords being checked in the code
Oh
or
yeah.
private keys, and if your code reviewer is just giving it a perfunctory glance, then he or she's not doing the job either. And so these two combined is something I'm thinking about. I'm not necessarily doing it. I'm open to being wrong, right? I've been wrong before, I'll be wrong again. But when we look at how to actually affect change, maybe this is a way.
I'm
so
a,
so
Go ahead,
the
Brian.
yeah, this is something near and dear to my heart, right? Because one of the things that I focus on is
Yep.
how do we use metrics as one of the tools
Mhm.
or being a force multiplier for creating change across a broader organization, right?
Mhm.
And I absolutely agree with measuring check-in, and integrations to the trunk.
Mhm.
In fact, I gamify it,
Mhm.
right? Because at the team level, if you've got a team of 10,
Mhm.
then per week you should have a minimum of 50 integrations to the trunk, right? And
Mhm.
so because that's the definition of CI.
I would
Mhm.
agree. I'd agree
And
with
if you
that.
tell people this is what the definition of CI is,
Mhm.
and you are here or you are here, then they can use that as a method to improve. Now, the back pressure that I try to use
Mhm.
for your committing stuff that actually matters is defect rates,
Mhm.
right? Even if there's code review, and there should be code review, but even if
Yeah.
there's code review, is it actually stuff that doesn't blow up production? That's the thing that
Sure.
I care
Mhm.
about. And then along with that, the duration of a user story or task, because keeping that short,
Mhm.
right? And keeping it short means we've refined it to a level where we can actually do continuous integration, and then we have
Mhm.
continuous integration, and then we have the outcome of the defects.
Mhm.
And so that combination of things to try to kind of balance out the forces to act as a forcing function on improvement, I totally believe in that.
I like the duration of the user story because it's a team thing. That's a team measurement because it means how they together are crafting the stories, how they are together are learning to decompose them, estimate them, organize them, group them. I do like that piece of it. Where I think that we're going to run into some problems at first is actually with code reviews. I am always surprised, saddened when I get with a team and they have no idea how to do a code review. They have no idea really what they're looking for. They have no idea about maybe some basic standards. Having a freshie, right? Having two juniors reviewing for each other is a good way to get them started with the practice, but it does take someone a little bit more senior, a little bit seasoned to be able to say, I looked
Well,
at
this
what
is,
you're
this
trying
is
to accomplish and I'm looking at how you accomplished it because there are two things, right? Did you accomplish what you set out to do? And is it effective? Is it efficient? Are there other ways, right, with the code quality that you could improve the code quality? So I think there are
well,
two pieces to it. Go ahead, Brian.
this is where it's really important when you're growing a team to make sure you've got a balance
Mhm.
of experience on that team, and this is where senior developers, their job is to grow more senior developers. I saw, and I'm going to rant about this for a minute. I saw an
Mhm.
episode of Silicon Valley. It was Code Review Day. The fact
Mhm.
that there was Code Review Day just really annoyed me. But the fact that the most senior developers had a special code review where they were code reviewed by somebody completely different from the rest of the team really pissed me off because they should be
When would
code
I
reviewed
ever have
by,
that?
they should be treated as an equal, right?
But when would you ever have that? I'm going to play
Well,
with this
I
for a
just wanted to
moment.
rant about that
No,
anti-badger.
I'm going to
Hopefully
rant
that
back
never.
at you. I'm going to rant back at you because if you have somebody more senior that's helping to train or to teach the team, but is not directly creating code as well. I've seen that
No,
situation where
no,
you
no.
have
What I'm
somebody
talking
who's
about,
floating.
I'm talking about a senior engineer who's also coding, and in Silicon Valley they were coding,
Mhm.
but because they were the founders, their code review was special. But
No,
I don't
no.
want to. I don't want to deep dive into that because really,
Yeah.
that's a whole other
Wait,
thing.
you don't want to deep dive onto the latest
Uh,
and greatest streaming binge watch?
that show's been off the air for like a year
Yeah.
Hmm.
now.
Doesn't mean that people aren't binge
but
watching it.
but as far as like you're talking the code review comments. Like on my team, the way we do code review is because we're remote. Almost everybody's remote these
Yeah.
days. We're remote, and so I'll go through and I'll code review, and if I'm looking through and everything looks like I'm happy with it, I'll just LGTM, right,
Mhm.
and then I'll commit. If not, what I generally do is I'll get on to chat ops
Mhm.
and we'll have a conversation about it and ask questions back and forth. I won't
Yep.
even leave review comments. We'll just take care of it right there immediately,
Mhm.
because that removes another handoff, right?
Hmm.
Instead of me leaving comments, them picking it up later and getting reviewed, we get that code integrated faster just
Wait a
because
minute.
we're real time.
So you're not going to take and create an external document that is a code review template, and you're not going to put your code review comments complete with screenshots of the code in that code review document that you put over into SharePoint? What? Been there, done that, seen it happen, and watched it just because it got ignored. There's never a reason to you either comment it directly in, right, or you comment it, you go through it in this verbal way,
Sure.
and you make sure that it gets handled. I mean, is that the same thing that you're doing in your world, Tom?
No, so we use Azure DevOps, and so in Azure DevOps, you can add a comment,
Yeah,
and that comment will block the check-in until that comment is resolved. Doesn't
yeah.
mean the code review is fixed, but the author of the code would have to handle that. So,
Yeah, I was just poking back at, I probably all of us have been developing for at least 5 to 10 years, just putting that out there as a possibility.
Now
And
I have actually seen the code review comment metric be gamed and abused. One of the things I rant about tools. There's tools out there for metrics, and some are good
yeah,
or strive to be good.
yep.
Some are just doing whatever metric is hot at the moment. I can't tell you how many people I've talked to, how many vendors I've talked to, are building Dora dashboards. And then some are absolutely destructive. And Git Prime is one of my favorite examples of something that's absolutely destructive tool because I've seen it being used destructively. It's so easy to weaponize.
well, say more on that.
So Git Prime harvests Git metrics, right? And at the level of the individual, right? And now, if you read the book that was given to me about how to use it correctly, there are good ways to use this. Unfortunately, most people don't read books, and so people weaponize it. But one of the things that I saw was, I saw middle managers pushing on code review comments, and so you just had meaningless code review comments to meet a metric.
Yeah.
So that would be my caution about code review comments as a metric, is that it's incredibly easy to game.
Yeah, I would
Sure.
agree. I'd
I
agree.
mean, I'm more concerned about you have 4 developers who regularly comment and add value, and then you have 4 other developers who have not ever put in a single comment.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, that's really where I'm looking at it. I'm not looking for the sheer volume or complexity so much as
No,
it
it's
is, are you actually doing your job to review code?
distribution. Yeah, the distribution and the shared responsibility of doing those reviews.
Yeah,
And I want to,
I'm a big fan of the team holding itself accountable to that, where it's, look, we need to do a better job because we're blowing stuff up.
now I
How
want
do
to,
you do that?
You
How do
what?
you hold them accountable? How do you hold them accountable? Because in the agile world, these teams want this accountability. They want to feel like their management is not telling them what to do and they're holding each other accountable. The reality is sometimes they don't. This isn't the army where if I mouth off, everyone's doing push-ups and running around with a log on my head.
Yeah,
Right?
I moved from a Fortune 1 company to a not even listed on the stock market company.
Yeah.
And I work very closely with really swimming upstream startup in the Department of Defense. And there's 2 gutters in bowling, and both of them are bad. You need some structure, right? And the purpose of something like a metrics dashboard is to give you some insights in the health of the system. And if you've got a team that's got really high metrics about delivery and really high metrics about code integration and really high metrics on even whatever you're measuring, that's as far as input, and the output is really crappy, then you've got a broken system, and you can say, hey guys, you need to get your defects down. Right now, one of the things that I believe firmly is that the quality is the outcome of the fear of poor quality. And so the way that you have a team that's accountable is you have a team that has ownership. That means they have
Mhm.
ownership of the outcomes of their decisions. So if they decide to not be very good at code review,
Mm,
um, and doing the work to make sure we have quality, and then
mhm.
they're not responsible for the outcomes of that decision, then it doesn't matter what we measure because we'll always have poor quality.
Let's track back to Tom's actual question. The question was, if teams need to have autonomy
Yeah.
and we want to figure out a way that they have both autonomy but accountability that sometimes comes from outside, right? A little bit of that.
Hmm.
How do we give somebody a home scale that they can step on because they're trying to get, lose a little bit of weight versus going to Weight Watchers and standing on the group scale in front of everybody?
You take
There
that
has
home
to,
scale, you take that home scale, and you broadcast it to everybody in the organization.
that's the Weight Watchers, right? That's the so the I guess where I'm going with that is as teams are first storming, forming, norming, right? As they're getting together, sometimes their first rounds of metrics, you want to give them that grace because it does take what is it? The old adage, it takes like 6 sprints or 6 iterations, 6 deliveries until a team starts to really get their groove, get their movement together. I
Okay.
would I would advocate that you wait until they get those first rounds going. Wait until they have a baseline that is somewhat consistent because at first it's going to be all over the place. At first the numbers are they're kind of maybe indicators of things where you might want to look, but they're not yet ready to
Well,
be
and
artfully
this is why a
worked with.
dashboard doesn't answer any questions.
Oh no.
It doesn't tell you anything. All it does is give you things to investigate, right? And so you have to understand the context of particular teams. But if you have a team that you can look at a dashboard and tell if a team's trying to game the metrics, I guarantee you because I've seen it, right? Versus that they're starting up.
Yeah.
You'll see different patterns if you know what you're thinking, you know what
Oh,
you're doing.
absolutely. Perfection across the board. Wait a minute.
It's like, wow,
When you start to dive in and take a look at the code itself, trying to see what's going on, no, very quickly, you're going to figure that out.
and I've seen dashboards that different companies have put together that are absolutely designed for vanity radiating.
Mhm.
Right, they're designed to judge teams, and they're using metrics that don't actually help you identify if there's a system problem with the health. Right, but we've talked a little bit about CI metrics, and those are really, I believe that's the engine that drives everything else. And
Mhm.
one of the things I'm writing a paper right now for IT Revolution about this, and I talk about there's 3 signals you're really looking for. You're looking for efficiency, effectiveness, and sustainability. Those are the
Mhm.
signals you're looking for if you have a goal of enterprise improvement, right? And CI is the engine that drives efficiency because it's going to be the thing that's like, well, we can't integrate code this frequently because we don't know what we're testing. We're not working well as a team. We don't have the right information. There's all this stuff that pops up if you're actually trying to do CI. And then you look at the DORA metrics, right? And those are becoming, unfortunately, another silver bullet in the industry that we need to
Mhm.
teach people how to use DORA metrics because they are good metrics if you use them
They are
correctly.
great used correctly.
But again, that's only efficiency,
Mhm.
right? And so, I mean, I've got some favorite metrics I look at for effectiveness and sustainability, but I'd be interested to see, Tom, have you looked at it from that perspective before?
No, I mean, I hear what you're saying. I also, when one works in a regulated industry, right? There's other things that come into play, such as Sarbanes-Oxley, Gramm-Leach-Bailey, uh, different
I mean,
cybersecurity logging standards, right?
I come
And
from a
that,
regulated industry, so yeah.
right? And so, sometimes that those are where I'm focusing back on these different product teams and making sure they're following that standard, right? Yeah,
Mhm.
Yeah.
sometimes what happens is a product owner says, I'm the product owner, I decide what done is, and done is X. It's like, well, actually, no, right? Your name is not on the door of the company, right? If your name was on the door of the company, then you could say that. But we have all these other pieces in here that need to be met. So as far as effectiveness, right? I mean,
Well, I have a definition of effectiveness
sure, give me your definition.
which is it's stable, available, secure, and useful to the end user.
Okay, so useful to the end user is a nice one. Again, that can be hard to measure because
Hmm.
people's views change. Secure is a very important one, and ensuring that is tested appropriately and
Hmm.
accurately tracked, because you ask people if something is secure and it's, oh yeah, it's beautiful, it's perfectly secure, right? It's like, okay, well, let's find out, right? So, and then what were the other two? I'm sorry.
Stable and available. Like it's like not crashing all the time, and it's there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Sure. And those, I mean, some of the precursors for that, I think, are the metrics that can come out of your pipeline. How many
Mm.
days of technical debt does Sonar Cube show? Did you just do a
Yeah.
check-in where you added 42 days of technical debt? I'm like, is that your best work?
Right.
Right? Or, I'm a big one on code quality and unit testing. So,
No, no, I agree. I think those are leading indicators. I think one of the problems we have in the industry is people have heard about some metric or some
mhm,
set of metrics, and they only
Yep.
measure those. And I gave a talk at DevOps Enterprise Summit last year about how everyone just Dora metrics. Everyone talks about Dora metrics, but they only talk about the metrics on page 19 instead of the other like 14 metrics that they talk about in Accelerate.
mhm,
And operational metrics are important. The metrics we have around are we going after the right goals are important.
Okay.
Are the customers happy? Are the
mhm,
teams happy? I mean, all of
mhm.
these are all of these things have to exist if you're going to be measuring the right things. You can't just focus on right here.
Mhm.
So I'm going to come back to, in giving you guys some opportunity to navigate this. At the end of the day, and we're closing down on our half hour here. So at the end of the day, the
We
goal
have to
of
do a half hour because this is really fun.
okay, the goal of metrics, specifically the goal of any measurement, is to affect change. If you want to affect change, you need to understand your baseline, and then you need to be very specific about what you are trying to measure and the purpose of it. And if you don't understand how to change that, if you don't understand the context of the measurement, can I get the data that I want? And
Hmm.
can I affect change against it? And can I experiment to do that? I'm going to fix this number. Therefore we are going to check code check-ins. And this is how we're going to be doing that, for example, and validating and verifying it. We can have 72 different lists. They can be Dora, they can be Flow, they can be traditional, traditional, agile, they could be what have you. And you won't get the value unless you are specific and determined. And I know that sounds really lofty and
Mhm.
all,
Well, no,
strategic,
but I
but at the
think
end of the day, it's frustrating that people just glom onto what kind of measurement do I need? I don't know, but let's do these. There's a list.
no, no, no. I think this is important because there's lots of things at play here. One is what are our goals,
Mhm.
right? Any metric we measure should tie up to goals, right? So what's the signal we're achieving our goals? What proxy metrics do we need to make sure that we're getting, that those signals are getting met, right?
Right.
That's really important. You don't just want to measure randomly. I was talking to someone. Oh, I made a comment recently about you don't want to measure individuals unless your goal is HR instead of like improving business outcomes. But the other thing is that there are metrics for things like RPM,
Mhm.
where you can measure RPM,
You're right.
and that's a simple problem. How fast is that shaft rotating? Right?
Okay.
That's a simple metric. Okay. But when you measure people, the act of measuring changes the behavior which impacts the metric. And so you always have to have one or two guardrail metrics around that to make sure that measuring this doesn't get outcomes we don't want. Because you're changing the outcome simply by measuring the behavior. And it's complex, it's emergent. If you're measuring people, listen, you can't predict the outcome. You can look at general patterns and say, if I measure this, what could possibly go wrong? And
Right.
make some educated guesses at the outcomes
Mhm.
based off of group behaviors, right? And then say, well, I need to measure these other things to make sure that doesn't happen, to see if that other thing happens or not, right? but you have to be very careful when you measure people, because what's the quote? What gets measured gets managed. Managed,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah. Yep. Yep.
Um,
Yep. Or
that's a warning, not a good thing.
what's the alternative to that? What you look for, you will see, right? Isn't that a corollary to that as well? So.
I'm not sure.
Okay, so if you're thinking to yourself, I really want to buy a red convertible, I want a red BMW convertible, suddenly you see it everywhere. And so if you're looking for bad behaviors, you will see them everywhere, even if they're not bad behaviors. You will get what you measure, right? You'll manage what you measure, you'll see what you look for. So all right. So measure what matters, be specific and define it. Don't be afraid to have those items out in the public. Don't be afraid to have them out in the public space and
Well, and
sharing them, but
don't
not in a
measure
negative
anything
way.
unless you don't measure anything unless you actually know what action you're going to take, right, Tom? I mean,
Mhm.
because you've got specific ideas, right?
Hmm.
If I measure this and I can look at this trend, then I know that if I see this, I want to do this, right?
Hmm.
And so often I don't see that clarity of purpose.
Hmm. Well, think about employee net promoter score. I mean, that would be a very important metric.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And if all of a sudden your score drops significantly, then you know you have to do something. You may not know what to do.
Or you just fire everybody and hire happier employees.
Well, it's probably that you as a manager did something or your company did something, but you as a leader are falling short. And this
Yeah.
metric will give you the ability to hopefully make change. Now, it's not going to tell you what to change, but it's going
Right,
to tell you that
right.
something needs to change. So,
Yeah, and those are really hard too. I mean, it's really hard to ask people how they feel and what, and especially since if you ask them too often, they start feeling worse about you asking.
Well, they
yeah.
get really, what is it? You want to be careful that it's not a shameful thing, right? That they're not feeling shamed about it, but they're feeling enabled.
Yeah, and um, I heard of a company that was doing uh, employee net promoter scores,
Mhm.
and even it was even beyond that. It was like a survey about, bring in this, we want to work this way, and one of the questions was, my manager supports us working this way, right?
Yeah.
And those were used for part of the manager evals, so the people answering the questions knew that those were being used to evaluate their manager.
Right, right. If you're going to do something like that, that anonymity factor goes away with the teams are too small. If it is direct, giving direct
Oh,
feedback to your
I
direct
know it's
manager, right? There's a glint piece to it. Like if you're in a matrixed organization, you can sometimes use those, how happy are people? But if you get it down to a team level, if you get it down to a unique individual, any kind of anything like that, people know exactly who wrote it,
well, and
right?
I created an infographic for that talk I did at DUS that
Hmm.
and I talk about the fact that, hey, here's how all these different metrics relate through the stack, starting with company goals and going all the way down to CI,
Right.
right? But then underlying all of that's having the right culture. And if you have a pathological culture, it doesn't matter what you measure; it won't help you.
Mhm.
You
Right.
got to fix that, right? If people are afraid of you, if you don't have trust and a sense of mission, then the metrics will be misused no matter what happens.
Exactly. What we call them weaponizing, right? You weaponize the metrics, even if it's unintentional.
It may
If
not
the
even be weaponized. It could just be that since you have such a terrible culture with a lack of trust, people think they're going to be weaponized.
exactly. The trust is a very difficult thing to build
Yeah.
if you are not bought in and sharing something. So if you're going to, there's Philip LaPlante has a great book, Dr. LaPlante, and it is about patterns and anti-patterns for managing different types of software delivery. It's not about agility, methodologies, and like that. It's actually getting into patterns and anti-patterns. And one of the things he brings up is that building trust is not, it's not enough to put people together and say, okay, now work together. You're suddenly going to trust each other. Until we solve something, until we side by side, elbow to elbow, shoulder to shoulder, do something together that we co-own. big or small. Until we do that, we're not going to trust. And the only way we're going to get to that point where we're working together on something is if we understand and buy into the same mission, into the same business value, right?
And so just to spin off on that, and not to butter Tom up too much, but I've met Tom several years ago at DevHops Days Dallas, and since then, I've kind of watched the things he has to say, and Tom's the kind of leader I would go and work for, because he's not out there saying, you guys go fix stuff. He's in the trenches trying to help make things better, right? And that's what you're saying, right? Because that builds trust. It's like, I'm not just saying you go and do, I'm cheerleading and I'm helping to clear the paths for you, right?
Right.
And that's the only kind of leader you should ever have.
Well, and it's not just your leaders and the team. You have to think about when they pull the freshmen together, right? And they how do you build a sense of class unity? It's that they have a class project. It's that they have something that they co-own. Right. They own the success or they own the failure, to what you talked about earlier. Solve something together. And so if I think about how you're going to start to build trust and then be able to, it might be a two-step process or a multi-step process. Those metrics up front, you might have to throttle back. You might have to pick something and acquiesce so that you can have people working towards trust. So it's not as easy as we want it to be to say, well, if we measure this and we show it up in public and it's on, we have it all on the telescreens all around the suite that we're sharing together and we can all see everything. Sometimes we're not going to be able to do that all on day one. Going back to the weight analogy, I'm going to go ahead and step on my own scale for a couple of weeks until we start to share that. Now, I may share it with my doctor directly. He'll get to know what that measurement is. I'm not going to share it with anybody else until I understand where I'm at and why I'm there. And then I might not be losing weight yet, but at least I feel better on understanding where I'm at and what I have to do. I liken the same thing to those startup metrics, the beginner metrics to get people going. Is that reasonable, or is that too?
Oh, I
might
think
be too soft.
I think it's reasonable to feel that way. I think that I think it's important to try to clear that trust impediment as early as possible, and to constantly talk about. People are afraid of dashboards, right?
Yeah.
A lot of time. But if you are communicating that this is a tool to help you, right? This is how it should help you. This is how we should use this tool. And even going to the level of, and I've seen this happen where I've seen an SVP come down on his managers for misusing the dashboard because they started using it as a stick, and he absolutely took him to task for it.
Wow.
Right. And so it has to be a tool for help. There's two things, I know we're running long, but there's two things I want to circle back on. One was lines of code. And the other one was measuring developer productivity. So first, lines of code. It's a terrible metric for productivity, but what it is an excellent metric for is inventory.
Yes.
Right. So how many undelivered lines of code have we changed? If they're not in production, that's inventory. And if you know anything about supply chain, inventory is risk.
Yep.
Right? So keep your inventory low, measure how many lines of code haven't been deployed, and get that, just ship it. But the other thing is developer productivity. I've seen a lot of organizations popping up recently that, originally might have been termed, like delivery platform or something. And they're getting branded as developer productivity. And I think that's a terrible, patronizing, paternalistic name for that organization, right? Because we're going to make you more productive. Well, look, great. Then give me tools to get out of my way, but you're not making me more productive, right? Unless you treat me like a customer and not like somebody you're trying to make more productive. I think, if you have an organization like that, developer experience is a much better name for it. How do we improve the developer experience? If you want to improve developer productivity, measure how long it takes from new hire to commit to production.
Dang.
Right?
Yes.
But yeah, absolutely. You can't, Tom, what you said about us delivering widgets, that's the same analogy I use. Every single widget we deliver down the assembly line is entirely different from the widget before. Every single one is a prototype. every single one is an experiment to say, is this the right thing? Because it's
Right.
probably not. And you by just shipping more widgets, that doesn't make us more productive.
But I
Shipping
love the
right
term you
widgets-
used.
Shipping the right widgets makes us more productive.
I love the term you used. And so every time we hear developer productivity, if we're able to raise our glass and drink, we'll do a drink. But we want to change it to be effectiveness, developer effectiveness. Actually, I would say delivery team effectiveness, because
But-
we could have an
No, no, no,
argument
no,
about
I-
who's
I-
on that team.
I think that if you're building out this capability, you want to give developers the best experience they can have. You want to make it as easy as possible to go from idea to production, right? And you don't want them fighting to get things into production, right? You want them worrying about the problem and not how do I get the solution to the problem delivered.
But I would say that your developer experience would be based on their effectiveness, right? And their effectiveness is going to be providing them with tools, being very guarded about their
Training.
cognitive load, upskilling just in time, the right amount of upskilling. Don't upskill them on or train them on junk that they don't need and don't want, and do it in a way that helps them hit the targets that are on the goal path, right? Because we also don't want to provide right now. There's such a focus. We got to train. We're also putting people through regimens of training that they're not using. So we have to be a little bit better about helping people. Before it was, well, this is too expensive, we're not giving you training, you can do that in your spare time, and people are hobbyists in all different kinds of ways. We're now swinging to, let's give everybody training. We're going to onboard them, we're going to take whoever we can get in the door, we're going to give them a keyboard, teach them how to do everything from the ground up, but we're going to just keep training. I'm not disagreeing with the intent on continual learning. It's making it appropriate and helpful to them so that you're not forcing more cognitive overload. Right now, the amount of signals and signs and pressure and shift left. Well, okay. That puts the developer right in the crosshairs of everything. And we do have to be very cognizant of these, the folks who are writing the code. These are the folks who are actually building product, right? They are creating product for us. No, rant
What's
over.
the upper limit of cognitive effectiveness, right? If you have a development team, now you've decided, hey, you know what, we're at a new model, you build it, you run it. And so you now have one team that is supposed to be developing, architecting, writing tests, doing performance testing, learning Terraform, deploying the cloud, supporting it, managing it, ensuring it's secure, patching it. Open source licensing comes in. I mean, there's all these pieces, right? What is the upper limit? And are there only so few people who can actually do that?
No,
Right?
I think there's a lot of things that you talked about, though, that's where if you have, a platform area that's really focused on customer service, they handle it for them.
So you can delegate some of that. You can, that's what we're saying, but
Yeah, well, I mean, because things like security should be in the pipeline, compliance should be in the pipeline. This is
no,
not
checking for security should be in the pipeline, checking that it has been implemented correctly. The pipeline doesn't create the security. That should be the grand catch-all, right? The grand safety net.
But the pipeline tells them when they haven't been.
Yes, I agree.
So they don't. Yeah, oh yes, for some things. There's other things where we're not there yet, right?
Yeah,
But
your virtual machine patching, right?
But
All of a sudden,
they shouldn't have to learn Terraform, because that should just be, there's a platform service that just deploys an environment for them, right? You take away that cognitive load from people. You don't put that on them. A product team should be worrying about product, not how to deliver the product.
Right, not worried about necessarily what we've put into the digital platforms that are enabling them to worry about business features and business capabilities. But even then, there's not a perfect answer to this. There's not. It's going to be pragmatic. Well, hold on, it's going to be pragmatic. So if I'm a big enough organization, I want to be careful that I don't abstract too much away. And then I've got code jockeys and all they're doing is this, and they don't understand the platform. They don't understand the pipeline. Well, that's bad. If I start to push those things off too far. So it's a balancing act, which is you've got to get in the middle of it.
You do have to balance those things, right? But they shouldn't have to know how to like script Terraform to. I mean, that's really low level stuff for every single product team to do. That's something that platform should
Well,
take.
who's going to do? Yeah, so that's assuming you have a platform team.
Mhm.
The challenge with having a platform team is now you have developers who are half-assing stuff and throwing it over to a platform team, and then it's crashing because of unhandled exceptions.
So I think this goes. I think this goes back to what what Tracy was saying is, because I came from platform at a very large organization after spending years on product teams.
Yep.
And the one thing I can say is we did it correctly.
Okay.
Because we were like, hey, you don't need to know how to create a Kubernetes cluster. We'll just do that. You don't even need to know how to create a container. But here's the information about how to go and debug things that happen in that container, right? We'll do the heavy lift for you, right?
So I'm okay with delegating, but I'm not okay, based on my own experience, based on my decades, I'm not okay with people not knowing. So I want to expose them. I want to give them a 101 on containers. I want to give them the 101 on these things because I want them to be aware enough, because there are times where the things that are black boxed away from them or the things that are being done on their behalf, sometimes those inject problems, and you're going to have developers
yes and
aware.
No. Yes and no. If you're expected to have detailed knowledge these days of everything,
I didn't say detailed. I said you have to be smart enough. Okay.
There's black boxes that need to exist, right? But what you need is enough information to know how to look at what that black box is telling you. I don't need to know how to be a Kubernetes administrator to deploy to Kubernetes. I need to know how to look at my logs, right? That's the level of need to know I need. I need to know enough information so that I can debug when something breaks in production. But when it gets deeper than my application, when it gets into infrastructure, then I need to engage the teams that have that knowledge. Because for me to have the level of knowledge to know the entire stack these days is completely unreasonable.
I need to be aware. I'm always going to point out that you need to be aware. I will, if I find somebody who says that they're a front end developer and that's all that they do the React front end, they do nothing else, they call the API that somebody else has. Sorry, Charlie, I don't have a need for you. I need you to at least have 101, a primer understanding of everything. Like, I really feel offended at times where people say, I'm a full stack developer. I'll be like, well, that's what you should have been all along. You should have understood all along. And we could also have a really good.
To be fair, full stack developer was a lot easier when I was a kid.
Well, I would not disagree. Back when you were a kid. Oh, Shazam.
But even now, you're saying you're a full stack developer, but you're only a full stack on a single stack.
Exactly.
So that doesn't even matter anyway, right? You need to have a view of what's going on. Right?
Well, and getting back to it, it is indicative for us as leaders to help our people understand those around them. The platform itself, what we're calling platform, or what we're calling infrastructure, even when we don't agree on what is inside that box or not. So people need to have exposure so that they understand. I don't need them to fire up a network sniffer on their own to do something, but I do need them to be aware of it. So there is this weird balance, to Tom's question earlier, how do we help with the cognitive load? Well, I provide tools that can reduce the cognitive load. I appropriately delegate between the digital platform, potentially other infrastructure, lower level infrastructure or cloud services. I look at how I'm going to delegate those things, but I'm also going to provide the brown bags, the lunches. I'm going to provide opportunities. I might even give you like intern Friday, where you hang out and you're working with somebody to shadow and understand it a little bit more.
And there's one other really important thing you have to do, which is to go to the teams and ask them what's causing them pain.
Yes. That's a good point.
You need to actually find out. You need to treat them as customers. Hey, I'm trying to make your life better. What's causing you pain? How do we make that go away? Oh, we've got all this, we have to learn all these things just to deploy something. Okay, well, let's see if we can work together to figure out how to make that better.
So, fellas, it is getting late into the evening where I live, and I am almost out of wine, which could be a bad thing if I get to that point. What I'd love to do is, Tom, I would love for you to come back and visit with us again. I would love to continue these conversations.
Sure.
Because I learned things today. I learn things every time we have these conversations. And I like that you give us the grace to kind of be ourselves here talking tonight. We'd really love to invite anybody who's listening to send us your comments, send us your questions, tee up another conversation that you'd like to hear something about. Bryan always has a good rant. I always have a good snarky comeback for him. So please do reach out. And Tom, thank you again for joining us. And we'll see you on the next episode of On the Road to DevHops.
Hang on. We're not quite done yet.
Oh.
We haven't let Tom have a closing thought.
Oh, that's true. Oh, how dare me.
Tom, you're our very first guest, and we're noobs at this, so just please be patient with us.
I'm fine, right? It's casual, right? Thank you for giving me this opportunity. I enjoyed speaking with both of you. I now know you, Tracy. I knew Bryan. I've learned that this really is a small community, despite the fact there's tens of thousands of people in it. It's a small community. It's a welcoming community, and I'm happy to be here with both of you.
Thank you so much. And I do apologize for jumping the gun. We'll see how good my editing skills are if I'm able to splice and cut and move. So just remember where you were as we end so that I can cut you perfectly. So again, Bryan, any parting shots from you, my friend?
No, just, and we kind of strayed a little bit from metrics, but be very careful with what you measure. Know why you're measuring those things, right? And make sure that you're thinking with a tester's mindset, like what could possibly go wrong with this?
Absolutely.
Right? And verify that those things aren't happening. Right. You can't measure your way to improvement. All you can do is measure to find out if things are going off the rails and try to help use those metrics to say, okay, what should we focus on improving?
They're just indicators. They're just indicators, useful indicators done right, but they're just indicators. So
and sometimes they're broken. Sometimes the oil gauge is just stuck.
Right?
You need to go to the gimbal. You need to investigate.
All right, Tom, thank you from where you are. Bryan, thank you as well. And we'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.